Every photo captures a story. By the mere nature of photography, in the way a photograph freezes and captures a moment in time, photos capture and tell stories simply by being created and existing. And that is regardless of whether the intention behind the photo was to capture and tell a story. A moment is part of a story, and if you can capture that in a photograph, then you are capturing a segment of story. You are capturing a telling image that at the very least suggests some events, some happenings, some story. And that is something that absolutely fascinates me, that photographs are so effective at capturing and holding and telling stories and sharing information. With documentary work, where you're capturing and telling stories of truth, of reality, but it is also true for personal stories, things that are sown with bias and opinion and experience and emotions, things that aren't necessarily a black and white truth, but are a reality for at least the photographer, or perhaps the subject. Incredible for telling those kinds of stories too. Or even complete works of fiction. Photographs are an incredibly powerful way to tell a completely made up story, purely because of how effective they are at holding and sharing information. The reason that I'm making this video is because I believe that there's a lot of people, photographers and non-photographers, hobbyists and professionals, that don't quite realise the significance of and the existence of the power photographs hold in telling stories. The simple snapshots on your phone of you and your family or you and your friends tell stories that go far deeper than on the surface you could ever know without the context. Obviously, you're going to have the context if you're the one that took it. I mean, say you're drunk at a party and you take a photo, and in the morning when your memory's gone, you have a look at the photo. There is a story behind that about why everyone is doing a weird sort of dance at that moment in time, that those two people are stood next to each other, that fella's there on the floor. Like, there is a whole story behind these things that oftentimes with photos isn't immediately obvious. I want to share today a handful of my own photographs that I've dug up from the archives. These span from over the nearly a decade I have been shooting, and I just want to pick a few of these out and tell a bit of the story behind them, with the aim to hopefully make you realise and see clearly the power that photos hold in capturing information and in telling stories. Now, the stories behind all of these photos, some will be more obvious than others, because that's just the nature of this, that's just how this works. So, this is the first photograph. This is an environmental portrait of Chris. Big Chris. Chris Van Rouge, depending on how you know him, could be one of those names. So for the past decade, I've been going to a local open mic in one of my local pubs. I've been playing the cajon for a bunch of the people in there that play guitar and sing, and it is a great community of people and musicians. Chris is one of those people and musicians. He's been there since the beginning when I have been, and long before that, within those communities before I joined. He's a good man, he's a very interesting character. I did a little portraiture series where I took environmental portraits of a bunch of the members of this community at the local open mic, and the brief that I gave them basically was pick a location of significance to you, somewhere that means something to yourself. You pick the clothing, you pick the pose, you pick the facial expression. All I want you to do is pick all of these things, look at the camera, and let me take the photo. And that is how this portrait came about. It was one of the first ones that I took in the series, and it is by far my favourite. I think, talking just visually and aesthetically, everything really came together for this photo. The black clothes he's wearing contrast amazingly with the red poppy and the red scarf that stand out incredibly on the more neutral clothing. You've got the autumnal leaves behind him. This was taken... when was this taken? I believe this was taken last autumn, so autumn of 2023. Chris has a completely neutral facial expression, looking just dead at the camera, hands in his pockets because he's relaxed and he's comfortable. So for a bit of backstory, this is St. Cuthbert's Church. It's a local church. He picked the location because it has a lot of significance to him. I didn't dig too much into it because I don't think these things are all mine to know. The important thing was that there was some significance for him and that I took his photo in that location. But he did tell me that he has a lot of history with the church. His family has been involved in that church, and celebrations and events for him and his life took place there, hence the personal significance. So in this one, there is an incredibly deep personal story to be told as he stands under the Lich Gate. I think it's Lich Gate. I don't know exactly how to pronounce them. Those beautiful wooden gates in front of a lot of churches and graveyards here in England. But yeah, there is an incredibly deep personal story behind this image that I don't even know the full extent of as the photographer, because it is personal to Chris, the subject, not to me. Just from looking at that, you wouldn't immediately assume that all of that emotional and personal significance is there. You wouldn't immediately know that that deep story that goes far beyond anything that I could possibly actually tell you, because I don't have all the information behind it. You wouldn't presume that it was there, you wouldn't know it existed, and yet it does. Just for a little bit more context, there is another photo here as well that I took on the same day, and you can see the Lich Gate. I'm going to presume that's the correct pronunciation. Yeah, just for a bit of added context. Now, moving on to another image. This image is of Whinnie. This was our family dog going back, bloody hell, how long's it been? She's not been with us for about 7-8 years now. I took this before I would have ever classed myself as a photographer. At the point of taking this photo, I didn't actually own a camera. This was on a family holiday up to Scotland. I believe this one was up to Glencoe, Invercote, if I remember correctly. It was either that or Tyne-y-Brewich. I'm going to put a correction in here on the screen so that I get the information right there, but it was one of the two. I didn't own a camera. I took this on an old Canon. Oh, I've actually got the camera. So I don't actually own this camera. I'm just sort of borrowing it at the moment, but this is a Canon PowerShot. An S5 IS, I believe. So this belonged to my granddad, who passed it down to my dad, and we went on a family holiday to Scotland, and I kind of just used it for a lot of the holiday. And this is before I had a real vested interest in photography at all, over a decade ago, I believe. On that holiday, I took a lot of photos, including this one of our dog, Whinnie. And she loved Scotland more than any place on earth. She was a different dog in Scotland than she was down here in the northeast of England. This ended up being one of the nicer portraits, nicer photos that we got of Whinnie, so much so that I edited and restored it a bit, and it now sits in a frame on a unit at my mum and dad's house. In this photo is embedded many memories of Whinnie on holiday, on these trips to Scotland, running about free. That time that she captured a catfish. I mean, it was already dead, but I didn't want to really, kill the spirit there of her hunting an already dead fish, but she was absolutely buzzing with herself at this catfish that she'd found and she was running around with. When it got close to her having to be put down because she got quite badly ill, we took her on one last holiday to Scotland, which was the one to Glencoe, Invercote. Although I think she knew that she didn't have that long left, I think she had one last hurrah, one last free and happy time. And so there is a lot of personal emotion and a lot of backstory behind this simple photo of a dog that otherwise you would presume not much about. Right, on to another photo. This one is another really old one in my archive of photos. So this is a photo of a robin sat on a branch in a tree. I believe this was taken in the winter of 2016. So that photo I took of Whinnie was taken of a borrowed camera before I got into photography. This photo of the robin was taken on my granddad's camera, which now sits up there as it was a hand-me-down to me shortly after I took this photo. But at the time, this was my granddad's camera, and I went out with him on a little walk around Hardwick Hall, and we fed some of the birds and we took some photos. We used to do a lot of bird photography together back when I was just getting into photography. He was the reason I got into photography. He took me out with him, he gave me the camera, he let me experiment with it. He saw that I had an interest and a talent, and he incubated that, he pushed that along, he massively helped on that journey. And that photo is the beginning of that journey, the beginning of all of my photography. It is the first photo I was ever proud of. It's the first photo I looked at and thought, that actually looks really good. And although my standards might have changed since then, I look back at that image as the start of all of this, and of the career that I'm pursuing. And it also means a lot when it comes to me and my granddad, because that is one of the first times that just me and him went out to take photos, and that has become something that we do pretty much every week now whenever we've got a free day or a free couple of hours. So that simple photo of a rather round robin actually means a whole lot more to me than anyone would know on the surface. and it tells a far deeper story than anyone would presume. Right, which photo to go with next? Tell you what, we'll go with this one. Speaking of my granddad, here he is. This is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Ron Furby. I've mentioned it on this channel before, so if you're a returning viewer, you might have heard me mention it, but I shot a documentary photography project on my granddad as my final uni project, and the whole purpose of that project was to capture him the way that I see him and the way that I know him, so that I can pass these photos down through future generations of the family so that they can see him and know him like I do. The average person is forgotten after just 2 to 3 generations, so that would be my granddad being completely unknown to my future children. That just doesn't sit right with me. I had to do something about it, and so I started with this photography project, and that's where that photo was born from. This was one of the first photos that I took in the project. Obviously my granddad is a photographer himself, and he much prefers being behind the lens rather than in front of it. And so this was in the early days when he wasn't used to being in front of the camera yet, when he wasn't used to me constantly taking his photos, which eventually he did get used to. If I quickly show you this photo, this is one I took of my dad and my granddad right at the very end of the project. This was the last shoot I did, and you can see it is completely candid. He knows I'm there with a camera, but he doesn't care anymore. He doesn't act as if he's in front of the camera because he's so used to it. Whereas this one, there was no candid getting his face in the shot. If he saw that I was taking a photo, he was going to act like he was in front of the camera because he wasn't used to that. But in that, I was able to get him with quite a natural, organic smile as he's just realised I'm taking his photo. And I think this is a really beautiful portrait of my granddad, and this was the start of about 8 months, I believe, of me and my granddad going out multiple times a week as part of my uni work. So that was a good period, that was a good time. I really enjoyed it. I will remember that forever, and I have the photos to show from it. An incredible project of photos that will be passed down my family for generations started with that. Right, so that's some emotive soppy stuff that some of you may be interested in, but some of you won't. So I will move on now to this photo. A photo of some rather tall buildings that some of you might recognise as being in London, looking straight up. Reflections. That's what you'd pick apart on this photo if you saw it without any context. But the reality of this image is, it was one of the first photos I took when I moved to London. I moved down there and lived there for 3 years. I don't recommend it. It was awful. Hence why I'm back up here in the wonderful northeast. But when I did move to London, I was in a completely alien environment. I come from Norton, which is a village within the township of Stockton-on-Tees in the northeast. So at the most, I come from a town, residential streets and rows of shops that aren't absolutely rammed. That's what I was familiar with. Our local duck pond, the green, farmers' fields being not far away, 10-15 minutes from the sea. That was the environment I was used to and I'm used to. But when I moved to London, I was amongst these massive structures, these seas of people, this completely foreign culture and landscape. And that was one of the first photos I took amongst all of that. I saw London as this just build-up of glass and concrete, at least the centre of London. And if you go around Liverpool Street and Canary Wharf and those sorts of areas, I'd say I wasn't far off being right. So that photo was the beginning of 3 years in London, which was like hell, but was also a massive learning experience for me when it comes to my creativity and my music and my sound design and my photography and my video and generally just life. So that was the start of quite a lot in my life and a pretty major milestone in my whole photographic journey. Right, I've only got 2 more photos in here left to share with you, so I will show you, bugger it, you can see this one. This is pretty much the only self-portrait I've ever taken. I did this as part of a uni project, but it was a self-guided one, so me taking a self-portrait was my idea, not the university's. And this is what I took. A lot has changed since then. I'm no longer the same man you see in the image, but a lot has stayed the same, and in many ways I am. I don't really know what to say about the self-portrait. I just think that a lot of artists don't make art directly of themselves in a literal sense like this. If they do, it is certainly not the bulk of their work. And for me, that is certainly true. I do not do self-portraits very often. I do not like to take photos of myself. Even though I probably should for the whole family documentary thing, because I should pass it down, but I'm sure we'll get to that. I think this self-portrait to me means a lot more because this was the flat I ended up living in my 3rd year down in London, my final year that I lived there. And if I was to go back and track my personal development through each year, there was massive differences from year to year. And this one is me getting closer to the person I am today. There's a lot of memories within that flat, within that location, within that part of London. There's a significance behind those clothes that mark a period in my life where that's what I was wearing. And there's just a lot there that is already becoming nostalgic to me. And I will only become more nostalgic as time goes on. And to be able to show my kids in the future this photo, I think is going to mean a lot more then than it currently means now. Little self-portrait with a little story behind it. Right, final photo, I won't keep you here for too much longer, is this one. If any of you have ever been to London, you might recognise this location, although it might look a bit odd. This is Covent Garden, and usually you cannot breathe in Covent Garden because there is somebody pressed up against your chest. You are usually rammed in there like sardines in a tin. It is usually really, really busy. Even on a weekday, it's usually really, really busy, full of tourists and people who like to shop in overpriced shops. Personal observation. Also kind of true. I didn't know much about central London and the tourist spots like Covent Garden before I moved there, but I moved down there in 2020. And obviously we had loads of lockdowns and the tier systems and you weren't allowed to do anything. And I went out with a camera to take some photos of central London amongst all of that. And I stumbled into Covent Garden and I just found this nice looking square with a cobbled ground with not a soul in it. This was midday on a Wednesday, usually the kind of day you'd probably have a bunch of tourists walking around shopping. And yet there was absolutely nobody. At the time I took it, I did not realise just how insane, how incomprehensible that was. It's only as time went on and I went back to Covent Garden after the lockdowns and everything were over and done with. And there wasn't a single time I ever went after that point where you could walk without being absolutely rammed into by some inconsiderate person. I came to hate Covent Garden amongst all of the other touristy places that surround it, but that photo marks a pretty major event and time in all of our lives at the moment. Now, we all lived through it back when we had everything shut down, and how strange and unrecognisable our streets were. Obviously, moving to London, away from everything I was familiar with and away from family and friends, to a completely alien place in the middle of the lockdowns when everything was shut and you weren't allowed to do anything or see anyone, was a very unique and bizarre experience that most people will never have. And that photo just marks a small slice of that. Right, if you stuck through to the end, to this point of the video, then thank you. This was obviously a lot of information to just sit and listen to. It was just me telling a bunch of stories, so if that was interesting enough for you to stick around, then thank you. I expect most people will have probably clicked off. I'd probably need to work out some video ideas that keep people around for a bit more consistently, but I just thought this was an important enough thing to share about the stories behind photos and about the powers that photos hold in holding and sharing information and telling stories. A lot of these stories told themselves. A lot of them I didn't intend. The one of Covent Garden, I had no intention of telling and capturing such a story. That was just the reality of it, and I took a photo of what I saw. So yes, you can embed stories in your photos and make sure that things are being seen and told and shared. But also, if you just capture a photograph, there is going to be a story in it, even if there is absolutely no intention to tell one. So don't forget how powerful your photos are and just how powerful of a tool that you hold when you hold a camera. Right, I'm gonna go. So thank you for sticking around and watching. If you like this video, please do leave a like. It lets me know what you're enjoying and what you want to see more of. And if you want more content on photography and videography and documentaries and all of that kind of stuff, then hit subscribe because I have loads on the way. Sound for watching. I'll see you in the next one.